Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing my screen. I want to say that Zoom makes everything slower, but this is how fast I moved when we were doing it live. I don't know why I kid myself. All right, guys. This is the Sustainable Path to a New Normal panel discussion. Of course, there's myself pre-COVID, as you can tell, and Simon Blakely, my colleague. We did discuss about this today. And first, I would like to pass things over to our first speaker, Priyanka Lloyd, the Executive Director of Green Economy Canada. Now, Green Economy North is a member of Green Economy Canada, and that was our goal to be part of it when we created the program. It's a fantastic initiative, and I'll let her discuss it. But a bit about Priyanka. She is the Executive Director of Green Economy Canada and is a national not-for-profit which works to launch and grow green hubs across Canada and the province. She has held previous marketing and supply chain roles in Novartis Consumer Health and Frito-Lay. Priyanka received the Wilfrid Laurier 2015 Young Alumnus of the Year Award and was named the 2017 Clean 16. And she holds a bachelor's from the University of Toronto and a master's in biochemistry from McGill University and an MBA in Wilfrid Laurier. She is one intelligent person, and we are so jacked to have her today. So I'm going to let her take the floor. Priyanka, go ahead and unmute yourself and take it away.
Okay, well, thanks, Dave. That's a very kind interpretation. Another interpretation is that I like collecting degrees, which is what my partner likes to say instead. Really great to be here. I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists and learning a bit more, as well as sharing our experience at Green Economy Canada. So I have been with the organization since 2014 when we started. I co-founded the organization. And we were created to scale a successful innovation from Waterloo Region of engaging the business community to voluntarily reduce their carbon emissions. So the success of that program, called the Regional Sustainability Initiative, spawned our network. And we've been really happy to work with folks like Rethink Green to be able to bring a version of that program to local communities. So as Dave introduced, we are a national nonprofit dedicated to accelerating Canada's transition to a low carbon economy. And the reason that this work is important to us is because we believe that now is the time for a better business as usual. From climate change to vast social inequalities, we know that the status quo isn't working. But we also know that we have the ability to rethink what we do, rethink how we do it, and that by working together, we can make that a reality. So the way that we are working to help advance business sustainability efforts is really kind of in these three key planks. The first is that we launch and grow green economy hubs like Green Economy North in Sudbury, led by Rethink Green. And these hubs bring together, support, and celebrate businesses of all sectors and sizes in setting and achieving sustainability goals. So carbon reduction is kind of the bread and butter of what all organizations are working towards. But we know that all of the pieces around sustainability are quite interconnected. Climate change is connected to diversity and inclusion. It's connected to water and waste and all of those pieces. So we find that as organizations engage in this work, they really start to broaden what their concept of sustainability can look like. The second thing that we do is we work to share success stories of businesses taking action, because we know that these case studies make a big difference to other businesses following suit. And the last thing that we do is work collaboratively with policymakers to inform policies and investments that can build the green economy. We hear all the time from businesses that there are just some barriers to being able to take action, and having a stable and supportive policy framework that allows businesses to transition is really important. Next slide, Dave. So our network right now consists of 9 programs across Ontario, Alberta, and a provincial hub that's in New Brunswick that's slated to launch in a few months. And altogether across these hubs, there are what we call 300 green economy leaders, some of which are on this call today. Again, from manufacturing to consulting firms, breweries, First Nations communities, really the diversity of our network is our strength. Altogether, these organizations have collectively committed to reducing over 180,000 tons and have already reduced about 200,000 tons. So that's the equivalent of taking 42,000 cars off the road for 1 year. So I'm really happy to be here today. This is information about our organization. Feel free to connect with me directly afterwards, and of course, connect directly with Dave and the Rethink Green as well for the Green Economy North Hub.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. And once again, I've met some of the folks out east, and a couple of months back before the pandemic, and man, they were energized to get that going. So glad to see it's still developing. That's wonderful. Also, it seems that your email has crunched down a bit. We're just being space efficient. That's all that was. We're an efficient group here. So hopefully everyone can get that, figure that out. Next speaker is Kevin Boyle. He is a man who has told me he is more than just his curls. He is also the climate change coordinator for the district municipality of Muskoka. Prior to joining the district, Kevin spent years working as an environmental consultant specializing in human health and ecological risk assessment. He's gained an honors BA in geography and environmental studies at McMaster's University and a postgraduate diploma in environmental management and assessment from Niagara College. So I will invite Kevin to tell us a bit more about his role.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dave. So I think you got the introduction there. So maybe we'll skip on to the next slide. So at the District Municipality of Muskoka, we've been working on our climate sort of strategy and our climate goals for several years now. And recently we've had some great success. So in December of 2020, our district council unanimously passed a resolution that basically would help us incorporate all of our climate plans into our official plans, our strategies, and our general day-to-day business. As a component of that strategy called a New Leaf, we developed an internal corporate climate change action plan that is mostly adaptation focused, but also has mitigation actions in there. We didn't really want to pay our consultant to tell us to do a green fleet assessment or assess EVs. So we included a lot of actions in there, but at the same time, like concurrently, we're running 2 different greenhouse gas initiatives. We joined the Federation of Canadian Municipalities PCP program in 2019 and launched our initiatives shortly after that. So we're doing a Muskoka-wide comprehensive greenhouse gas baseline. We've been awarded milestone 1 for that, and we're about to get awarded milestone 2. I know greenhouse gas reduction targets were mentioned earlier. So certainly the District of Muskoka has committed to ambitious targets that follow the best science put out by the IPCC, which is about 50% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. We're also doing a corporate greenhouse gas project. And with that, like I said, we didn't want to pay our consultants to tell us actions that we already know from best practice. What we really want to do is focus on our water, wastewater, and our major processes to see where we can get efficiencies and reduce greenhouse gas while hopefully saving money. And to round out our strategy, we have, of course, education and outreach, partnerships, of course, with Rethink Green and a number of others across Muskoka, like Climate Action Muskoka, our Chambers of Commerce, Muskoka Steamship Discovery Center, the Watershed Council. And of course, we're always seeking and securing funding whenever possible, especially now as we discuss a greener recovery. And we know that the Canada Infrastructure Bank has a ton of money, or at least $2.5 billion for clean power over the next 3 years in order to move that forward. And I think do I have one more slide there, Dave? And just a little bit of contact information. So yes, it's just kevin.boyle@muskoka.on.ca. Feel free to send me any questions. We also have just updated our website to be AODA or accessible. And so we're also incorporating a new climate change section, as well as pertinent to Muskoka, a new flood information session to help our residents be more resilient to climate impacts, as well as to flooding, of course, which are related. And hopefully we'll have resources for businesses and individuals to lower their carbon footprint and become more efficient as we progress with that website. Thanks very much, Dave.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'm really eager to see what strategies you guys engage in for the wastewater management piece. And that's obviously one of the further steps a lot of places go into, and not everyone necessarily achieves or gets to. So to hear you engaging in that is actually really refreshing. So I'm really curious to see what the area does for that. I'll be watching that closely for sure. All right, next is Olathe McIntyre, staff scientist at Space Place and Planetarium at Science North. We're very lucky to have her with us today. Obviously, Dr. Olathe McIntyre is a staff scientist. Her qualifications are very extensive, including a Bachelor of Biology from Dalhousie University, Master's in Space Science from the International Space University in France, and a PhD in Environmental Sciences in the University of Guelph. She has developed climate-related school programs and was on the content team for the new Climate Action Show, a multimedia experience designed to activate change agents, which I really love. Action to change, action, awareness to action. I love that. And she obviously loves inspiring the next generation through space exploration and climate action. And if you've ever talked about outer space in this town, her name has certainly come up. So I would love to pass things over to Dr. Olathe. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I feel like I'm a little sort of the odd person out on the panel, but I'll do my best. I am also a member of the Green Team as well. I'm not just space science. I'm like quickly filling the role as sort of our climate scientist. So getting to work on projects that are helping really bring climate science into the mainstream for people, helping them understand it, and of course, helping them be activated as change agents, as people who can go out and really start making a difference in their communities. And speaking up too is something that we're really encouraging. Next slide. So I have been with Science North since 2016, but of course Science North has been a long-standing member of the community, 37 years now. And really Science North, I mean, it's kind of linked to the regreening. I think it was, you know, that some of the same people involved and similar efforts and similar vision of where Sudbury is going that helped establish and create this, you know, nationally and maybe internationally recognized science center here in our community. We are the #1 tourist attraction, but we use that role to help build tourism throughout Northern Ontario. A really good example of that is an upcoming project we have called the Great Northern Ontario Roadshow, which is really just completely focused on re-energizing Ontario and, well, Northern Ontario specifically, tourism industry. So we do operate science centers, but even though we're in Sudbury, we are also in all of Northern Ontario. And of course, we're really interested in science communication and in getting another generation of science communicators out there. So we do co-direct a science communications master's program at Laurentian University. I hope we still do. And it's awful. It's really awful. So yes, next slide. This is my contact information. You know how to get a hold of Science North. You Google Science North, you'll get us. But if you want to reach out to me personally, any of these platforms will work.
Thank you very much. And before we go on to Norm, I think it's fair to say that all of us at Rethink Green and Green Economy North have our thoughts with those at Laurentian University, and hope for the strength for everything to endure. Excellent. Okay, so I will now introduce Norm Rigetley, the Executive Director of Rural Ontario Institute, who has now Norm, who said earlier, we were talking about our hair, he says he did not have the same problem that the rest of us did during the pandemic in regards to haircut. His joke, not mine, so it's okay for me to say it. And he comes with a master's in rural planning, a 30-year career in rural development, including local government, provincial government, nonprofit sector as well, for early experience with pollution probes, as Canvas Director, and 7 years as the Chair of Ontario Farmland Trust. He also has volunteer experience under his belt with the Guelph Solar Co-op and managing food cooperatives. So a real powerhouse in regards to sustainability and it sounds like food security as well. So I'll pass things over to Norm.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. You could flip past this one. That's an old picture. Yeah, so the Rural Ontario Institute, nonprofit charitable organization, broad mandate. We develop rural leaders and we facilitate collaboration around common issues for rural and Northern Ontario stakeholders. So how we do that is really in these 3 baskets that are on this slide here. So we have leadership development programs where, you know, people are program participants and go through with a cohort through an experiential leadership program. The flagship there is called Advanced Ag Leadership Program. And it's been running actually for 36 years. So it's got a lot of alumni. But many of the grads from that program, you know, take other leadership roles in the nonprofit sector or in municipal councils and that kind of thing. So it's not just for ag sector organizations. I mean, those leadership skills go with the individual, right? Not necessarily their position. And we've recently introduced a young adult focused leadership program called Change Makers, Rural Change Makers, and had a successful pilot last year despite COVID. Had good participation from the north, Timmins, Elliott Lake, Sudbury participants. And you know, one of the outcomes of that program is it's about mobilizing community and about positive change in those communities. And change makers sort of choose the issue and passion project that they're focused on. And one of the other outcomes is not just their skill set in mobilizing and positive impact. It's their willingness to stay in rural Ontario, make their lives in rural Ontario. And we have good evidence that that happens through the program, and in part that's by connecting young people that want to make a positive difference for their community, and they feel like they're working alone sometimes in small and remote places. And by connecting them and networking them, we can inspire them and keep them working locally. We also have a series of programs around, or project activities around, informing rural leaders. I guess probably our preeminent product is a Focus on Rural Ontario fact sheet series. We publish data almost every month that is cracking out the sort of rural trends from the broader Canadian and provincial trends. And that's all freely downloadable from our website if you wanted to look at that. We also sometimes commission, foresight papers. So we did one on, with the cooperation of the Northern Policy Institute, we published, I think, 12 foresight papers. So there's a Northern perspective in every one of them. And so they're looking at different issues there. So those are on our website for anybody that's interested in those issue areas. And we also try to connect rural leaders around those common challenges, and we do that through similar kinds of initiatives that Green Economy Canada does. We do webinars, we do case studies, we do demonstration projects, and we're basically trying to transfer adaptable good ideas from one part of rural Ontario to another part of rural Ontario. And that's us in a nutshell, really. The last slide is contact information, and I would just supplement that by saying that if you're on our website and you're looking for the things I've referenced, it's probably in the Knowledge Center mostly. So if you go to that drop down, that's where you'd find those things.
Norm, we're glad to have you today, and we're sad we didn't have you yesterday because we actually had a really good discussion about food security in regards to electrification and how reduced energy costs in the food industry sort of create a more food secure Northern Ontario and a more food secure Ontario as well, and just everything that the situation's brought forward. Now, I will go through some questions, and I'll direct the questions as we go. So I'll definitely say who to speak next, but feel free to have a discussion as we go if you have a point you want to jump in on. I think what's really great here is we do have people from all over the province. So, I mean, when we say Northern Ontario, for instance, if Priyanka, I would love to hear your Southern Ontario perspective, especially because Green Economy Canada, was founded in obviously more south than here and has grown and taken roots. So the questions we're asking here might necessarily be rooted in some of the answers that you have from your personal experience. So we'd love to hear that perspective as well. And I think that really bring a lot to the panel for that. So thank you. So question one, and I'll send it to Kevin first. What do you anticipate the outlook for Northern Ontario economy will be next year based on the current trends and needs of the future? So what do you anticipate the outlook for the Northern Ontario economy next year based on current trends and the future?
Well, thanks very much for the question, Dave, and thank you for picking me first.
You're welcome. I'm jealous of your curls. We've been through this.
No, I think that it's going to be a challenging economy for the North, particularly in the next year. But I do see new opportunities to try to access a new sort of batch of local tourism, provincial tourism. Obviously, the economic recovery, we have to see exactly what funds come out of the provincial and federal government to support small business, to support municipalities. As I mentioned before, there's already a number of sort of funds that have been committed from the Canada Infrastructure Bank around clean energy and around ZEVs or infrastructure for EVs. So depending on how that money rolls out, will have an impact on the economic recovery. But certainly that'll be coupled with people that are trying to get back into the employment sector, businesses that maybe folded, trying to restart. And then certainly there's going to be a challenge because there's going to be mental health issues, and there's going to be a lot of catching up to do from just a general health unit perspective, I imagine, on all the programs that weren't the focus this year. So I think it'll be challenging, but from what I see in the funds that are coming down the pipe from the federal government and the provincial government, whether it's through community foundations, support for COVID relief, for PPE, some funds that are coming out of FedNor for business. I think that there is hope there. I think it's going to be a challenge, and I think it's something that northern municipalities are very rugged and reliable and resilient, and I think it's a challenge that we look forward to taking head on.
If I can one on to that, you did mention sort of EVs and EV charger, EV infrastructure. Do you think that green energy and sort of clean technology is going to play a part in regrowing the economy after this?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope it would, right? As a component of the Healthy Environments, Healthy Economy plan that the federal government put forward, I believe it was about $15 billion in investments to cut pollution as well as building clean technology. And so there is currently open applications for the zero emissions vehicle. And so that's electric vehicles and other. And there is some new funds for rural municipalities around transportation that isn't as scripted as it was before with set pickups, but is more on demand, which is interesting to learn some more of those details. But I think I just, I think I got a little away from your question there, Dave.
No, it's fine. That's great. No, that's fantastic. It's the point of these things, to hear your opinions and then let the conversation go where it will. I like it. Thank you so much, Kev. Olathe, I'll ask the same to you, because I think, talking about the tourism piece and sort of the science communication that Science North brings, and an advocate of clean technologies, I will admit that the first place when I was a kid that I learned that Sudbury regreened was Science North. So, that's where all Sudbury kids learn it first. So,
and that certainly is a very inspiring story. And I think it's one that, kind of helps create the culture of Sudbury, and is something that really we've been able to then go and offer to the world. So hopefully, hopefully in the next year, we do get to see our educational institutions well supported. I can speak a little bit to Science North's outlook. Specifically, like, we are expecting about 50% of our attendance and revenues in the coming year compared to what we normally see. So that's a huge decrease. We do expect to weather that, and we expect to return to our pre-pandemic levels by the 2023-2024 fiscal year. But we are expecting a slow recovery, and I think tourism has been one of the most impacted sectors, and so it'll recover, but it's going to be slow. That's what I expect. I think one way that we've adapted is we've moved to online offerings. So we have a lot of digital offerings now, some even to schools. Like I zoom into classrooms now, and I talk to kids about the Canadian Space Agency and what's going on, and that's been like a whole new world to us, and it's really exciting, and it's not something we're going to quit doing even when we do return to normal levels of on-site visitation.
I saw a quote once that said, we as a society have advanced 10 years in regards to our comfort for online technology in 1 year. And I think that's very, very true. And that does kind of go hand in hand with a reduction of emissions, reduction of travel and all of that. Yeah. So that's,
we used to fly to northern communities and do a lot of road trips and traveling. And we are still planning to do road trips, but we can reach a lot more communities, because if you think about it, we're covering an area that's 800,000 square kilometers. So if we can do that virtually, that's really great. Yeah.
I love that. Norm, what's your thoughts on this in regards to the anticipation for the Northern Ontario economy over the next year? What do you think it's going to look like after, if there ever is an after of COVID-19, what that will look like, and especially from the perspective of agriculture? Oh, you are muted, Norm.
Sorry about that. Probably not the first time that's happened to me today. I'm going to actually sort of switch gears. I might not talk about agriculture as much as you might think.
Yeah.
So I think the long-term reality for rural and Northern Ontario is skill shortages. and that is present now. It was present before the COVID, and it actually didn't get better through COVID. So our communities, rural and remote communities, are in a big struggle for attracting talent. And we're kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to sort of the Canadian demographic. It's just that people are aging out of the workforce faster than they're coming into it. And so I think for any economic outlook, whether it's in the sort of green economy or not, it's about the search for skilled talent and properly trained people, and especially for new types of jobs that didn't exist before. That's an even more significant challenge, I think. But there's some advantage in the potential growth in the green economy, because to the extent that there's newer jobs in that sector, sort of different job descriptions, different skill sets. If those young people are prepared for those, it's an easier segue than potentially into other trades and so on. So I think that's the big story. I think our numbers have been tracking, prior to this latest lockdown, the rural workforce in Ontario is not really significantly smaller. Like it's only 1.6%, smaller the number of jobs in the rural economy right now than pre-COVID. So, but there's a real female component to the impacts. They're sectoral, like in tourism sector, like it's already been talked about, but also there's a gender dimension to that. So, and I believe that that's related to childcare and household dynamics that shifted, but also some of the sectors that have been most impacted. So I think to come out of this, on a strong rebound, Northern Ontario has to address those issues, and get and help with that caregiving in that sector. That's really important. Childcare is really important, and so on. So skills and people, that's where you got to pay attention to. Yeah.
Actually, we have a comment from the audience, and it's talking about the Gravenhurst Chamber, saying that they're also feeling something very similar to this, with some problems with accommodations and mentorship. Have you come across in your trade or your fields a challenge with that mentorship process? Not just people who are talented, but people who can bring other people onto these trades or these new jobs. Have you come across any challenges like that you've seen?
Oh, absolutely. And there's two dimensions to that. One is the skilling up people through exposure to workplaces that, if they don't have mentors, especially in the trades, finding apprentices and that sort of thing. But it's also business succession. We did the average age of the business owner is really high. It's actually higher in rural Ontario around small business than it is in the ag sector. Like we think of farmers as, older men. And so I think there's a real opportunity to make business succession more successful if we link up young people who are looking for careers in their communities with those business owners that foresee a business succession on the horizon. And that horizon is present now. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, but it is a challenge, absolutely a challenge.
Before we head to you, Priyanka, Kevin raised his hand. So I just want to see if, Kevin, do you have a point you want to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, and I know it's very different with different rural municipalities. In Muskoka, we're definitely the most south of the northern rural municipalities, because federally we're north, but provincially we're actually south. But in Muskoka, I know there was a comment from the GV Chamber, the Gravenhurst Chamber, that I actually work with. But the other issue in Muskoka is housing, a lack of housing, and the impact of COVID with over a 20% increase in your average house and over a 30% increase in your waterfront property in 1 year, when we already had housing shortages and I think a 1.7% vacancy rate. So on top of just the general challenges of attracting skilled people, housing them becomes a challenge, especially, you know, when you're some of the business relies on seasonal population. And then of course, coming out of COVID, groups like the Gravenhood Chamber have approached us to work on a sustainability initiative. And in fact, we've had a meeting with all of our area chambers, but we're very aware that that businesses are strapped and they're very tight. But sustainability is, of course, making sure that, you know, we use less greenhouse gas, that we're responsible, reduce our plastics, but also sustainability is that the business can keep operating. So what are we doing as a municipality to put in place to make housing more affordable, to make more rental, so that we can attract those people? Even if we're having trouble attracting people, if we can't actually get them here in areas where you can't do virtual, then we're shot. So I think municipalities and groups like Rethink Green and Green Economy Canada play a big role here. And certainly in my case, you know, I want to work with my chamber as much as possible, but, you know, the bandwidth to do that while running all the other projects is limited. So, you know, I think it's really great that we have this discussion and we can look to expand those opportunities.
All right, a lot of great stuff here. Priyanka, I'll pass it over to you in regards to this. And we heard a lot about sort of this green, like what can we do sustainably to help businesses as we transition out. And as someone who has, you know, over 300 and likely more every day, you know, community leaders, green leaders, you know, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I really want to, you know, echo what everyone has said here. I really think that those points are on the mark in terms of the trends and you know, the issues around skills is such an important one. I think some of the opportunities here, just maybe before I answer that specific question, Dave, you know, one of the things that I see that has opened up across the board is that, you know, through COVID, people are actually moving back closer to home because they can work virtually in a way that they didn't feel like they had permission to do before. And that, you know, housing in major urban centers, for example, is even more expensive and more difficult to get in than, you know, in other areas. So I wonder, you know, what opportunities that can afford for Northern Ontario. Specifically, if we were to address, you know, the kinds of things that Kevin is talking about there with, you know, good housing, good opportunities for training that Norm has brought up, and employers being, you know, willing to offer more opportunities that do allow people to work remotely. In terms of like broad-based trends, so Canada has set a goal to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to be net zero by 2050. And we're seeing across the board, just in terms of, you know, the business community and investors saying, this is where we need to go. This is no longer up for debate. We're going. And that's going to have significant pressures on supply chains, right? So it's going to pull large businesses to be thinking more ambitiously than they've ever thought before. And it's also going to put pressures on small and medium-sized businesses that make up those supply chains to figure out how they can be a part of helping larger organizations meet their goal, but more broadly helping Canada achieve its targets. And we know that small and medium-sized enterprises don't have the time, knowledge, and resources often that larger organizations may have access to. So they face additional pressures that are heightened, especially as we think about the COVID and you know, keeping their core business going, let alone figuring out how to make this shift. So I do think, you know, in terms of what comes out of the budget on Monday, the federal budget, and the kinds of stimulus programs that are available to support businesses to not only make sure that they've got a solid base to kind of, you know, peek their head out from, but then to give them the kinds of skills, and it's more than just funding programs, right? It's supports that help them overcome some of the capacity and knowledge and time barriers that they might have to be able to undertake this work. So that if a young person is looking at how they take over a family business, as we talk about that succession piece, Norm, that those young people are equipped with the kinds of skills that are going to be needed to make sure that that business is viable for what a net zero future is telling us is needed. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, but it's complicated, right? Because there's a lot of factors in terms of where businesses are at. And I think, as the other panelists have highlighted, it's connected in so many different ways to what else is happening locally in terms of housing, in terms of training, and those kinds of pieces.
Yeah, I mean, these are challenges we faced before the pandemic in regards to the skill sets and, you know, in attracting people to our communities. You know, and we talk about this as a northern issue, but I have no doubt that every community has that challenge. How do I attract more talent into my, you know, my community, into the economics of it? And this is something I'll say is do you think that green technologies and training, because yesterday we were talking about how, you know, there's a vast untapped resource in regards to training to be solar technicians. And just something like being trained to be a solar technician is an opportunity and a skill set. Do you think green trades might be something that young people could be looking towards based on what you're seeing with business needs?
Absolutely. So one thing that I have heard from young people is that they're looking for certainty for what are the trades that they should be investing in, as they're thinking about what to do next and where the jobs of the future are, wanting some certainty in terms of, where are we headed in terms of Canada, in terms of our bets of what we're going to invest in to get to this future is really important for them. There is no doubt, Northern Ontario, but across Canada, to meet the scale of the ambition that we have to get to net zero by 2050, we not only need to figure out how to, change the structures and systems that we have, but we need people that are equipped to do this. So, if Northern Ontario can become a hub for this kind of, talent training, talent pipeline, I think it's young people are looking for this, and it would be a great opportunity.
Great minds in the room and great minds in the call. Make it happen. Talk to each other after. This is how it starts. All right. Well, I'll pass this over to Olathe first. How do you think Northern Ontario will shift to a greener economy in the post-pandemic? As yourself as a science communicator, I mean, you and helping co-direct the science communication program, I'm sure you see a lot of emerging technologies and emerging practices. How do you think that's going to play a part in a greener economy?
I think it's going to be a really important part. So I'm a big fan of Sudbury, or the City of Greater Sudbury's Community Energy and Emissions Plan, or CEEP. If you haven't read it yet, if you haven't looked into it, they have a great website up, and it's worth checking out. And that plan, if we follow that plan, we can expect, it's sort of laid out between 2020 and 2050, we can expect to see a savings of $14.6 billion. And that's not just the city saving that money, that's community-wide savings. And along with that, an increase of 40,000 person years of employment. So the plan to achieve net zero is also an economically viable and beneficial plan. So I think, following that plan is a great idea. And I think that's one of the ways we're going to shift. Bringing it back to just sort of the broader idea, I'll never forget, I saw a presentation by an economist when I was in my undergrad in university. And he said, what we really need to do is we need to shift from sort of a thing-based economy to an experience-based economy. We need money to flow between people, but it doesn't necessarily need to be an exchange of physical objects. So people will pay a lot more money to, maybe they get a bread maker, but then they also get to become, part of a bread making club, and they get lessons on how to make bread, and they get to meet people while they make bread. Maybe these days it would just be virtual, right? But they'll pay a lot more than that. And it's a really big, important experience, whereas if they're just going to a big box store and pulling a box off of a shelf that has a bread maker in it and taking it home and trying to, do it by themselves, it's not worth nearly as much. And I think that's part of the shift to a green economy, is recognizing what we have to offer to each other in terms of relationships and experiences, and learning and education and that sort of thing. So I think we'll see that shift happening.
Olathe, I mean, that bread making experience would have been very useful a year ago, I think, for most people in this call.
Yes,
I think,
yeah.
Like, where was that like 12 months ago? Jeez.
And along those lines too, like, I really do hope we see the shift. I mean, I go to the market. I love the market. I'm working away at establishing my own garden, but I think that sort of shift in economy towards things being hyper local, towards, buying things from your friends and neighbors, and really just being our own suppliers and our own consumers, within our own communities, and then doing that in a way that is working towards net zero is where it's at.
I like that. I really do. I am a big believer in buying a used item or buying something from a friend, especially because I know who to complain to if it breaks. I can be like, listen, man, come on. Norm, I'll pass it on to you. How do you think about Northern Ontario will shift to a greener economy in post-pandemic? And how do you think it's possible?
Well, I'm super, pumped about that local food thing, but having been in the natural food movement for a lot of my career, but I actually think that the Northern Ontario economy is shipping a lot of goods, right? It is very thing based when you think about where the minerals and forestry and other things. And there's a lot of diesel in that, and there's a lot of long haul shipping in that. So I think if Northern Ontario is going to be greener, it's also going to have to work on that long haul transport piece. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there. You know, the EV semis exist, you know, it's a matter of putting the infrastructure in along the Trans-Canada that has those supercharger, you know, quick charging infrastructure and that sort of thing. And that requires a huge amount of grid infrastructure as well. Like that's a lot of power really quickly. So, and there's a lot of technology associated with that. So, you know, I think that's where there might be some opportunities for investment that has some, you know, deep long-term impact is around the long haul transport that's happening there. And I think there's economic opportunities surrounding it for sure. And so I think that's a piece of it. I think hydrogen fuel and how to use, you know, renewables to create that hydrogen fuel. There's niche opportunities around that, I think, as well. So to me, each of those things requires a significant amount of infrastructure investment. I think Northern Ontario should put itself at the front of the line when it comes to senior levels of government to say, we have the perfect test environment for that kind of investment. And so, you know, put it here. So, you know, I think it needs visionary leaders, you know, to seize that opportunity, but I think the opportunity is there. I think home heating is a hard nut to crack, right? And it looks, I mean, most of our houses, you know, they're built to last 100 years, right, or more. So we got a lot of old housing stock. It's not going to be easy to retrofit. So I also think that it's really important for government leaders, and I'm sure that the Muskoka's, you know, thought through some of these aspects about the community energy kind of planning. But I think you do need to give individual people a sense that they're participating in the change, because they won't support the big government investment in big technologies for corporate, you know, interests if they're not also experiencing the sort of net gain in their own scenario. So, and I think that's a home heating set of initiatives. So I think that has to be part of the puzzle too. So between those kind of more infrastructure oriented investments and the home heating challenge, which also addresses poverty and equity issues too, which I think we really do need to be sensitive to, you know, through this. So there's some ideas.
A lot of great stuff there. Everyone, hope you all wrote that down. That's the plan. That's how we're solving it. All right, everybody, cancel the slideshow. We're good. No, a lot of great stuff there. And I'm going to go to Olathe. She has her hand up to respond, but I do want to say, talking about that long haul trucking piece, one of our members, I think they might be in the call, Split Rail Brewery was having a challenge with some of that long haul trucking in regards to a canning process. So we had assisted them in getting a grant to get a canner just in their facility up north, reducing the GHGs from pulling that long haul truck from Southern Ontario to cut down on that. So I mean, there's a lot of businesses do face that. Olathe, you wanted to comment on that?
Well, that what you shared is just absolutely amazing. And Norman, I really agree with you. I know that's part of the SEEP plan. A big chunk of that emissions reduction is in retrofitting homes. And actually there are, for those of you here in Sudbury now, there are subsidies provided through Enbridge for insulating your home. And it's can be free of charge. My neighbor actually just had people in and they did caulking and they re-insulated her walls, and there's absolutely no charge for that. So definitely look into the funding that is already currently available for retrofits.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Absolutely. I mean, we're right. We have a lot of old homes. The building I'm in right now, pretty old, and I live here, so I know. I'll pass it over to Priyanka. And we talked a lot of great stuff about retrofitting heating systems. This is a lot of sometimes the bread and butter of what green economy hubs do, helping businesses through this. What's your perspective on how that kind of stuff will help a greener economy going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point here. Sort of two pieces, right? So one is I think for all businesses that they need to start thinking about um, what products can become services. So that point about whether we want to or not, I think there is a shift, especially in the younger generation, of caring less about owning things and more about access to services. So I think that that's not a trend that should be ignored, and every business needs to think about what aspect of that makes sense for them. Having said that, to Norm's point, making and moving goods is still going to exist, and it's a big part of the Northern Ontario economy. I think what is going to need to happen, though, is for those goods to, be attractive for others to purchase, as other people are thinking about greening their own supply chains, thinking about how we can reduce the carbon intensity of those producing and shipping those products and services is going to be really important. So one example, which I don't know, maybe we'll talk about in the next question, but mining lithium has been brought up, I think, is one area in the north that there's that the World Bank was saying that we need to, in order to meet our 2050 climate targets, we need to have 5 times as much lithium as what is currently being mined. Having said that, when we mine lithium, it has a significant carbon impact, a significant water impact, and a significant land use impact, depending on how it is mined or how it is produced. And so, as automakers, for example, are looking towards their own net zero goals, where they source their supplies is going to be top of mind for them, and they're going to want to be sourcing the lowest carbon intensity inputs, so that for them to meet their own goals and for them to be able to say that they're contributing in the best way possible, what their suppliers are doing matters. So I think for Northern Ontario to look at what are the industries that are expanding, that's going to be really important. But then also for those industries that are expanding, how do you expand them in a way that makes sure that we're still trying to reduce carbon emissions as much as possible, that we're being thoughtful about how the land is used, how much water is going in. And I think that also opens up a huge opportunity for piloting clean technologies that can help also meet Canada's other goal here of being kind of a clean tech leader around the world.
That's a very good point. We did talk about sort of that lithium piece yesterday too. So I'm glad that it might come up again in the next question, because I think it's actually really a cool topic that we can explore more on. Kevin, I don't think we've hit you yet with this question. So you were first last this time. I did you a solid. What do you think about this in regards to the shift to a green economy? Like, what's needed?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll talk about it from a couple different perspectives. So from a municipal government perspective, of course, we did launch our climate strategy that has a number of actions in it, including actions that are designed to help businesses recover from extreme weather events, but due to the timing, also from events like COVID or just disruptive events, and recover in as green of a way as possible. But from the municipal perspective, one of the things that we're doing that came out of a resolution that was attached to our strategy is with all of our staff reports and all of our decisions, we're assessing them through a climate lens. And I can't give all the details because it's going to committee soon, but it's public knowledge because it was a part of the resolution. But basically, with every single staff report, we'll start to assess, what the mitigation or sort of resiliency components are of that project, and not like a detailed quantitative assessment, more like a high level qualitative assessment to start the dialogue between departments to make sure that we're following the actions that we've outlined in our corporate climate change action plan. But B, that we're aware that we're trying to do better in basically everything we do. So from a municipal perspective, having our strategy, having our greenhouse gas in place, and having a climate lens that we can use to help weigh decisions will certainly be the way that we'll move forward. But to support our local businesses, we know that we're looking to create a broadband strategy, because obviously access to high-speed internet, or at least adequate internet to do a call like this, in rural and northern communities is much more challenging. And I mean, some of the costs per pole to install fiber optics are just out of this world. Now, thankfully, there are some new technologies, and I know quite a few of my friends in the Muskoka region are having great success with Starlink, and hopefully there'll be, hopefully it'll be a combination of using those solutions with traditional solutions. But I know that that's an area where it would make it easier to attract talent. It would be easier for all of those families that, are having trouble because their kids are schooling from home. So I think the broadband strategy, one thing we'd love to see would be the return of the Northland, so that when the economies open up or when we can travel again freely, at least within our province, that we can do that from North Bay to and beyond all the way to Toronto. And then, of course, I think, our businesses, like I mentioned, our chamber has taken a leadership role in saying, okay, well, how can we do better when we move forward? So I think a focus on the hyper local. I mean, if you think about it, the last statistics I saw were your average grocery store item traveled 2,400 kilometers to get from the farm to the processor to the distribution to your grocery store. And indeed, if you're looking at like something that's packaged like a yogurt, I think it's around 3,800 kilometers, which is really, I mean, just insane the amount of greenhouse gas that's associated with that. So local markets, local community gardens, buying local and supporting those messages is something that we certainly would really, we're really trying to work towards. So I guess I'll keep it short on this one, but that's where we're, from a municipal perspective, we're trying to support businesses, leadership from our business communities who are trying to support our projects as well.
And what a surge to local focus this whole experience has had. I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say that in reality about how a surge of local goods has come out on this. I mean, even in groups creating a farm to table Facebook group. So from informal to very formal, it's been a huge piece. And I really find it interesting when you talk about sort of that broadband internet piece, because I think everyone in this group, based on all the vast education I just read off, 40 minutes ago, how important access to information is. And free access to information and education, so we can share sustainable ideas, is so important. So I really love that point, for sure. All right, so let's go on to question 3. This has been really good. Which industrial sectors, enterprises, or businesses do you hope to see more of here in Northern Ontario? Norm, I'll start with you in that regard. So you might be beneficial. This kind of also goes a bit to the trades thing, I suppose, as well. You are muted before you start again.
Yeah, so I'm batting 1,000 so far. So I took a little bit of a different approach to this. So I was thinking about the remote working part, and about this whole goods producing sector versus knowledge serving sector, and we've touched on that a little bit already. And I think the remote working is definitely going to benefit the knowledge workers if we can solve that broadband issue that we just mentioned. So I think talk to your local MPP and MP about broadband. I mean, that violin has been played for quite a few years now, but we're starting to see continuing investment and some real progress there. But I think we need to keep the pressure on there. But so I think that will benefit all types of businesses, that broadband investment. But I think the knowledge workers might be in goods producing sectors, but they're occupying knowledge worker roles within that sector. So it's not as sectoral focus. It's what kind of job you have, right? But there's still a lot of people that need to go physically to work to do a lot of jobs. And I'm thinking that the remote working bonus that might flow from COVID is going to be primarily in suburban communities where those knowledge workers were already commuting into a central office location. They're not necessarily going to transplant themselves in a major way out to a different community, unless it's driven by that attainable housing dynamic that we talked about before. So in which case it's usually a household that has to move, not just an individual, right? So it's not just one person's job, it's the whole household dynamics. So this is a long-winded way of saying I think that the remote working bonus isn't going to be as long-term big as people think it might be. That's just my gut. So I'm sharing that on this question.
We actually got a couple of comments just came in regards to in regards to housing. Actually, as you were talking about that and talking about one individual brought up how housing sales are up 30%, making it unaffordable to live in certain communities when attracting people to new areas. And one person also raised, talking about how affordable housing overall. Catherine, who brought up a great point earlier, talked about that, how it could help for local talent and keep people in homes, tiny homes, also for less carbon footprint. Before we pop on, I see Kevin has his hand up there. Kevin, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, well, add to it or maybe agree to disagree on it to some extent. I think Norman's right when it comes to, there's obviously the work remotely for now, and that will start to drop off as things go back to normal. But I do think that, and it's a difficult discussion, but the ability to work virtually, and if you have more of an education, it really sort of it increases that gap between the sort of the middle class and the people that have socioeconomic challenges that likely don't have the education to work remotely or have the resources to work remotely. But where I wanted to touch on was in Muskoka last winter, we had from the studies differ, but we had about 7,000 more people living in Muskoka last year, which on the surface doesn't sound like a lot, but we have a permanent population of about 58,000. So we're looking at about a 12% increase. Now, normally in Muskoka, seasonally, we have more paramedics in the summer, we have more hospital staff, we have more grocery store staff, we have more everything. So 7,000 people or 12% increase is quite significant. And it means more. It means more use of assets like roads and bridges and stuff like that, but also services like paramedics and especially with vaccination clinics and stuff. But the trends in Muskoka, and maybe it's because of our proximity to the GTA, are that's just going to increase. And I think, the 7,000 people that moved to Muskoka or that lived in Muskoka probably lived in secondary homes, and they probably realized that they can do their job from there just as easily as they could from downtown Toronto, but with a little more freedom and a little better of a background. But from the real estate projections are that our population growth will increase in Muskoka, and that part of it is due to the opportunity to work remotely. So just a quick comment. So I do agree with Norman, but then at the same time, some of the evidence in our area has gone the other way.
It's interesting to see that from both sides of the spectrum of this remote learning. It's remote learning. Sorry, remote. All right, Norm's hands. Before I hop in, Norm, your hand is up. You take the hot seat.
Yeah, no, and I was just going to actually reinforce that point. I think the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association surveyed people with those second homes, and I think 8% of the people were working from their second home, their cottage, right? So in those places with a lot of unoccupied seasonal residences, you might see that bump last, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case, in Wawa or Marathon or other places like that in Northern Ontario. It's going to be in that driving zone that people do have second homes from. And that's not to say that folks in Sudbury don't have a camp, but then it's transplanting work from Sudbury to the camp, right? So, you got to look at where those people are coming from to see whether it's a net gain, from a sectoral economy perspective.
When you said transplanting work to camp, I think everyone in this call had memories of like it being successful or not. We've all tried it. We've all had horror stories. We've all had success stories, laptop trying to get some Wi-Fi. That's why we need that Wi-Fi, frankly, all over the place, is so we can work from camp more. Priyanka, I'll pass things over to you in regards to this. And you said you were going to might be talking about a bit about the lithium sector. What do you think? What industries do you think enterprises and businesses we should develop more in Northern Ontario or in Ontario, frankly, to help support that green economy?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to add too much more than what was discussed before. I really do think that there needs to be a focus there on, job skills training and particular types of job skills training. And what I'm also hearing too is that in terms of, a key focus, like a key economic focus for Canada, there is quite a bit of focus on how we can scale up the clean tech companies that exist in Canada. And one of the biggest barriers that they face is understanding what the needs are around clean tech, and then actually having willing partners to help test and pilot their products so that they can get to a commercialization stage. So, when I think about for some of the more, the industries like mining, for example, where there's going to need to be significant innovation, if that's going to remain a portion of our economy. I think there's some recognition that it will need to be, even though we need to transition to other things as well. But for the portion of it that needs to stay, I think for Canada to be a leader, there's a tremendous opportunity there, not just for the mining companies and the jobs that they create to be, the lowest carbon intensity possible in terms of what they're producing and how they're doing it, but also a tremendous partnership opportunity for clean tech companies that want to be developing these kinds of technologies and have partners willing to test with them, for those companies to be supporting the scale up of these new kinds of industries as well. And if you can pair that with, job skills training that's really specific to that growing clean tech industry, that may be really well suited for Northern Ontario, whereas other parts of Canada may be able to train up on other kinds of skills that are needed for the green economy. It could be a nice sort of confluence of things that helps to kind of have enough stuff going that people would, want to move to Northern Ontario, that there's jobs there that are not only really important and uniquely developed there in Northern Ontario, but they're actually building jobs for the future that would make those folks employable across the board. So, yeah.
I mean, you mentioned partnerships, and I think that's something we haven't really talked about much, even though I think many partnerships might come out of this call for information sharing. I'm really excited about that. In regards to clean tech and industry for partnerships, do you think that's the direction that is going to be the most supportable from a government, municipal, regional business standpoint? What's the value of those partnerships in these clean technologies?
Yeah, so the irony here is I'm not actually a clean tech person, and I actually think that we do too much reliance on technology and not enough on behavior change and the stuff that we already know exists. So just like as a caveat, the Climate Choices Institute, which is sort of an independent think tank that was established by the federal government, economic experts, environmental experts, they came out with a report in February about what is our pathway to get to net zero, or 2030 goals or 2050 goals. And the findings in that report are that the vast majority of technologies that we need already exist for us to meet our 2030 goals. There is new innovation that's needed for sure of unknown stuff, but the vast majority of things already exist. So our challenge really is how we get people to adopt these things when needed and like use less stuff to begin with, which should change their behavior. So I think like clean tech and all of that is super sexy. It's very attractive in terms of growth industries, but I wanted to kind of underscore that, people and doing the stuff we already know needs to get done, like really important to invest in. Having said that, this is a significant issue right now in terms of Canada seeing that there's a global opportunity here around clean technology, that those partnerships in terms of being able to test, to understand the needs, and especially for those small clean tech companies to be able to test their products, that is really critical. And equally critical is, I think, for Canadian businesses to show that we're going to buy Canadian clean technology, because then when we go on the global stage, like countries are asking, why would we buy your stuff if domestically people are not buying your stuff? So I think that there's a real opportunity here when we think about supply chains, when we think about keeping jobs local, when we think about building out new industries that are resilient, and trying to meet the dual needs that we have, the many needs that we have, I should say, around job skills training, making our products competitive, growing new industries. There's a lot to be said there, I think, around how we build those partnerships to make that possible.
I'm really glad you brought up the behavior piece. I've been with Rethink Green for a couple of years now. I spent some time on the green economy north side, as Priyanka, and then we found Simon Blakely, who's twice as brilliant as me. So we figured he should probably do the job, and it's been going very successfully since then. But I remember going into businesses and saying, okay, here's looking at your emissions, looking at your bills, looking at what you're doing, and then the question that many of them were stumped on and why we would ask was, okay, well, tell me what your day looks like. Tell me tell me the process from your start of your product to your end of your product. And what are the behaviors there? What are you wasting? What are you like, what is, you don't need to do? And that sort of process. And that was the hardest part for them to answer was, yeah, I know I can buy a machine that'll use less energy, but I don't know how to operate and waste less materials. So that's an interesting point about the behavior of it.
Yeah, and if I can give you a quick anecdote, Lafarge, quite a big company, case study from the Edmonton-based operation, they were able to save 20% of their energy use just from behavioral changes. Didn't spend a dime. It does add up, and of course, like where you're starting from also matters, depending on if there's a lot of opportunities for improvement or if you've already done quite a bit. But yeah, in all cases, if you don't need the thing to begin with, like asking yourself, do you need the equipment? Do you need to do the thing? If you don't need that, then that's great. Or you can get a smaller version, that's great. And then if you can change how you use it, those are really simple things that any business can do to make a big difference.
That's fantastic. And for the shameless plug, for those interested in having an internal team on how to help look at those things, we have a green team guide on our YouTube page that was helped develop, of course, with Green Economy Canada, because they are fantastic experts in that. So perfect. All right, so we're gonna go. Oh, look at this. No one will know what the end of the question is. It's just all compressed. But what should be the short, medium, and long-term priorities in terms of achieving greenhouse gas emission reductions, implementing more sustainable developmental goals? I'm just assuming the rest of the question. I did read it before, but I think the core of this question is, what are the medium, long-term, and short-term priorities in regards to greenhouse reductions, leaving out of COVID, just in general from a business perspective or not? Actually, I'll have Priyanka first, if that's all right, to lead our way to that question. What do you think those priorities should be? Oh, developmental priorities. Thank you, Simon. I knew that. He said it to me. See, Simon's smarter than me. That's why we got him to do the job.
Yeah, so I think in terms of emission areas, was touched on before. So, typically the largest sources of emissions come from energy use in buildings, so the way to heat and cool and power buildings, as well as like process related emissions, depending on what kind of industry that you're in. And then the second piece is really around transportation. That's a huge opportunity. And in Northern Ontario, it seems like a really big one. So any focus there, I think, in being able to look at what can be done, and within those, there's going to be a suite of low-hanging fruit that everyone can do, versus things that are going to require more investment or more knowledge to figure out what else can be swapped in its place. And in general, opportunities to electrify are better than not, because we can produce electricity a lot more cleanly than other fuel types. So that's one piece. I would say, though, just for an organization that is starting out, like if I just look at the business perspective, measuring where you're starting from makes a big difference. So you can't manage what you don't measure. Businesses understand this for all their aspects of their operations. So really starting with what are your greenhouse gas emissions and where do they come from is the first step. And then from there, being able to identify actions and set short, medium, and long-term goals, ideally aligned with what science tells us is needed. So that's a 50% reduction by 2030 and a 100% reduction by 2050. And so the first phase of that is going to be, like I said, low-hanging fruit, probably some capital projects that businesses could take on with some funding incentives. But really, I think what's going to be the tipping point for organizations to be able to achieve these longer-term goals, which are more difficult, is to really integrate this work into the core of the organization, to have it be a central goal, to have senior leadership support to keep going, to be able to learn from other organizations, to be able to work with policymakers and identify what are the sort of systemic barriers that prevent organizations from transitioning. A lot of the kinds of stuff that the Green Economy North team supports with, but in our experience has been really important to get the kind of long-term change.
And talking about implementing those changes long-term, what do you find is the most challenging when working with businesses and organizations? Do you find it's difficult for them to actually implement stuff long-term? And I don't mean difficult like a mental resistance, because they're with the agency, obviously they have, but I mean actually the knowledge to implement it. Do you find that's the barrier, or where do you think people kind of peter off on the long-term? Like, what's the challenge?
It really depends. So a lack of senior leadership support, or the flip side is senior leadership conviction, can make a huge difference because it determines how much of a priority this is across all different functional areas. So if people continue to see this as side of desk or important, if this is corporate social responsibility, but it's not corporate responsibility, that the difference in how they perceive this kind of work makes a big difference to how they can progress. And then outside of that, for sure, I think, part of it is just time, part of it is money, and part of it is access to knowledge and resources to know what to do. And part of it is that we don't actually know how to get to net zero, right? Like, for a lot of this right now and kind of the state of flux that we're in a bit of a pickle, right? Where we're asking organizations, municipalities, et cetera, to step up and say, this is what science tells us is needed. We don't have the roadmap to get there, but we don't have a choice, and we're going to figure it out together. And so, for organizations that are a bit more risk averse, they might feel like that being that bold or having that kind of plan for more sustained reductions is something they don't want to entertain. And for others, that's just kind of the writing on the wall, and we got to figure out how to get there. So.
You said we don't necessarily know how to get to net zero. I saw a lot of nodding heads. We're doing our best guesses sometimes, best educated guesses. So Kevin, I'll pass it on to you. I saw you definitely nodding your head to that. What do you think the long-term, medium-term, short-term goals should be? And what about this whole, how do we not being necessarily sure how to get to net zero? What's your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, well, I think for the short, medium, long-term priorities, maybe from a business perspective, I think Priyanka covered it, but it's save money. So it's the low-hanging fruit. It's, an incandescent bulb costs you $90 to run for 10 years, but it only lasts 1,200 hours. An LED will cost you $18 to run for the same time, but it lasts $25,000 to $100,000, dollars. If there's, projects like Save on Energy, which is run through ISO or the electrical systems operator, or through, your local natural gas provider or whatever, the things that save you the most amount of money, but also make a difference would be where you sort of focus. And then in order to help, there's the building and transportation side, which are generally the two biggest hitters, are, support from federal and provincial governments. So I love the example of, in the UK, they used to have a target of banning internal combustion engines that aligns with Canada's 2040. 3 years ago, they sort of indicated and clarified recently that it's now 2030. So they're having to put in significant investments into infrastructure, as well as sort of a carrot and stick approach to buying electric vehicles. We know in Norway, they've been doing this for years. A big incentive if you buy an electric vehicle, a tax if you buy, an internal combustion vehicle. No tolls if you have an electric vehicle, tolls if you're driving in a gas-powered vehicle. So help with going for options that save money, help with transportation, and then helping with building retrofits, which is really tough. So I usually like to start with just more significant rebates for things like high efficiency heat pumps and using electricity in areas where possible to generate your heat. Because in Ontario at the current time, and hopefully continuing, we have a very clean energy system. And so that would be one of the big changes. One of the difficulties when it comes to retrofits, and I'm still for them, is that many of the traditional retrofit materials like spray foams, aluminum clad windows, and a number of those other treatments, you'll generally never save the amount of carbon that it took to mine, extract, produce them. You're going to save money, but if you look to groups like Builders for Climate Action, out of the Peterborough area, they do the calculation. So going back to the last question a tiny bit, is in the short and medium term, I'd love to see a more sustainable building sector in sort of Northern Ontario. Sustainably managed forests, cellulose insulation. There's all sorts of products that you can take a new build and from a huge greenhouse gas emitter to actually a sump. And that's because you're locking up those carbon retained materials for a long time. So I would love to see that sector improve. But from a business perspective, it's what can we do so that they can save money and save greenhouse gas? And how can we connect them with those funding opportunities? And how can we advocate from a municipal government perspective to increase those incentives or set them up ourselves through community energy financing and so on and so forth? But I think those are where I'd like to see sort of the short, medium, long. Start with the easy, low-hanging fruit. move into changing your sectors and your local tourism and purchasing, and then really sort of advance from there. But Priyanka's right, we don't know how to get to 2050, and I've just committed, or we've just committed as a government to getting there, and that's daunting, but that's all right. You know, we know that that's what we need to do, and so that's what we're going to try to do.
That's I mean, that's it. I think there's a sort of a humbling nature to admit that, yeah, we want to do this. We may not necessarily know everything that's involved. We know a lot of what's involved, but we don't know every little detail, and that's humbling too. And it kind of gives some awe to the situation that we are in and the resources we are dealing with. That some things are just bigger than us, but we will try regardless. And I think that's just really beautiful in that. Olathe, if I can pass it to you in regards to the short, medium, and long-term priorities, and even in on the concept of, you know, how are we going to get there? Because you yourself had mentioned the Greater Sudbury Community Energy and Emissions Plan, and you know, us as a community in Greater Sudbury committing to 2050 goals. So, what are your thoughts on all that?
Apparently, we know how to get there.
Yeah, we're already figured, guys. We figured it out. Don't worry.
What we need now, and it's the same with the regreening, right? With the regreening, we needed collaboration. We needed the industry to come on board. We needed the government to come on board and legislate the Clean Air Act. We needed the universities. We need that education and science component. But most of all, we needed the community, right? And with the regreening, that was really, there was this whole movement of community members who came out and rolled up their sleeves and did really hard work and sweat and prepared the ground and put down the lime and the fertilizer and planted the trees, right? And that's what we're looking at here. We need that entire picture, that collaboration and effort from every level, but especially the community level, and people just saying, yeah, this is my home. I'm going to make the difference. I'm going to take the actions that we need to take, and we're going to move forward. And in the community energy and emissions plan, a big chunk, like, there's sort of this main graph that it shows the pathway to 2050 and where we're going to see those drops in emissions. And we see a really big chunk early on in a category called waste management and diversion and energy generation. And so I think, obviously that's a near-term goal, right? It's to start diverting our waste to make sure we're properly composting, we're properly recycling, and then that we are capturing the methane that our landfill is creating, methane being a powerful greenhouse gas, and we're using that for energy generation. And from our bringing it back to Science North business perspective, for us, we have adopted a 3-stream waste management at the science centers. And so it's a thing that we can just do right now. And again, it's behavior based, as Priyanka pointed out, right? It's not a new technology that we're using. Midterm, I think it's making sure, planning for that net zero, making sure whatever project you're developing, whatever you're taking on, whatever you're doing, trying to build in that net zero. So for our example is we're creating a new film, Reasons for Hope, an IMAX film with Jane Goodall. And we've committed to that being a net zero film. So where we can make good decisions, we will, and then we'll use offsets. So the offsetting is a big part of it, right? Like Sudbury's going to keep planting trees. That's a part of this. And finally, long-term, for us, a long-term sort of project comes down to like our infrastructure. Like we have a 37-year-old building. Obviously, it's not as efficient as it could be. We know from Project Drawdown, and if anyone hasn't checked out Project Drawdown, I definitely encourage you to check that out. So that is very science-based, and it lays out the top 100 solutions to climate change, and it ranks them, and there's a lot of background information. So, we do know what we need to do here. And one of the big contributors could potentially be refrigerants. If we don't properly manage our refrigerants, that is going to have a huge impact on climate change. And it's not a sexy thing. It's not something we talk about a lot, but it's huge, right? It's that, and then like food and equality for girls and women and access to education. These are sort of the big things. So for us, for Science North, what that means is, we spent years saving up and working on getting the funding to do a retrofit of our HVAC system, be able to upgrade from R22 to R410A. I'm probably losing you at this point, but even longer term, we want to phase out. We don't want to use R10A forever because it's also a greenhouse gas. And we want to adopt something more natural, and so those sort of infrastructure, mechanical, energy saving things. Those are the longer term projects. We already have solar panels, and we actually, with our refrigerant retrofit, we're going to see a 15% savings in energy. So that's good right there. And we're going to be very careful about our management and leakage and that sort of thing. We're planning to replace it. And then we've already got the solar panels, and those have been great. Like we're producing 213 kilowatts of energy annually. No, that's like on a day, and then 270,000 kilowatt hours of energy annually. And what does that mean? It's enough energy to completely power 15 average homes for a full year. So that's solar panels, right? So I think those are sort of our longer term, like getting those solar panels going. And of course, for Sudbury, switching to electric vehicles. I know that was part of the early on the public consultation process. People are not ready to give up personal vehicles. So as well as investing in public transit and that sort of thing, the switch to electric vehicles is a big part of the plan.
Like that. And I will say that one of my personal indicators for a healthy community has always been its public transit system, how it moves its people through its city, regardless of financial demographic. I think has always been a sign of a healthy community. So I'm really glad that transportation piece is on the SEEP and always growing.
It's amazing. Being in Europe, like you're just, wow, why aren't we doing this? Like it's just amazing. And there is a history with Ford and different influences going back, but I think just one other thing, in terms of I absolutely agree with Priyanka on we are going to continue mining, we're going to continue forestry, and the face of mining has dramatically changed. The environmental impacts of mining have been far reduced, right? We're down to 1% sulfuric dioxide emissions, and even capturing that sulfuric dioxide and using it as a product. And so I think mining has become sustainable. But also looking at our resources, our natural resources, we take it for granted, but we have forests. And, having been to Europe, that's amazing, right? So this year, 2021, this is the year of the staycation, right? Where nobody's going anywhere or doing anything. And we don't want to attract international tourism. But going forward in the future, we've got this, rich cultural offering too, especially with Indigenous tourism. And we have forests. We in the city limits of Greater Sudbury, we have actually the world's largest old growth red pine forest, right here in our city. And we have night skies that you can actually see stars. So those are things that are incredibly valuable. And there's not an environmental impact on sharing that with the world. And then as we become leaders, moving towards net zero, imagine getting to go on a vacation where not only do you get to go hike in a beautiful park and see beautiful night sky, stars that you don't get to see when you're, say, in Toronto, but then knowing that you're staying in a hotel that is also net zero, getting to live for a week knowing wow, I was net zero this week. How satisfying is that? And what a good way to help people move forward just by building the alternative here and being leaders.
Love that. Norm, I will pass it over to you, and then afterwards I will invite everyone. We didn't get through all the questions, but as such is the case when we have brilliant speakers, which I'm very glad for. I'll take a good discussion over taking every single question every time. And then I'll invite everybody to share any resources they'd like to share before we close off the session. But first, for this question, Norm, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, so that was just greatly inspiring remarks. I think I can't really add a lot to that. I mean, just in simple terms, what's preventing us from achieving the home heating short term, which I think is a priority for the short term, and it is motivational and behavioral, which we've talked about. So I think we really need to be in the short term looking at those motivational things, the carrot and stick that was mentioned. I totally support that. But there's one dimension that I don't think we have touched on yet, and that's that right to repair. I think, as part of that behavioral change and about reducing new consumption, which is a lot of embedded energy, in those products. I think we should be helping with that movement that's global now, and I think we should be part of it. I think in the medium term, I think we talked about that long haul transport fuels options. I think that's really important. And that's an infrastructure investment thing that's more senior government based, but I think local players need to be part of it. Long term, one new thought there is just about the how important it will be to have energy storage systems in place. And I think by incenting, home-based, solar production, we will have, a lot of batteries out there in people's homes, and that can serve as a sort of distributed renewable energy storage system. And we need to look at that. I think there's lots of other big ideas, about the pumping water uphill, when we've got supply and letting it run downhill. And, there's one thing that, big open spaces let you do, is maybe projects like that. And just to comment on the last remarks about, the forest systems, I was looking into, how much carbon is stored in the boreal forest in Canada. And holy smokes, that's a high value global ecosystem service. And I think not just letting people come and visit it and capturing the tourism. I also think that Northerners and Canadians need to think about that. We talk a lot globally about the Amazon, and it's a priority right now in the U.S. to start, working with Brazil to kind of incentivize rainforest preservation. I think the boreal forest is a sleeper, and we need to start talking about it more and communicating more about that high value global ecosystem service, because it is part of the greenhouse gas equation globally. So there's a few additional thoughts.
I think we're all very lucky to live where we do in Canada, with this vastly rich environmental ecosystem and the resources we have. And it is hard for us to sometimes remember the effects that are happening globally when we have so many resources locally. And we're very, very blessed for that. I will wrap things up. We are coming to an end. We didn't get to all the questions, but we did have some great discussion. Really quick. Our contact information is on the screen, but I will ask every speaker if there's any other information or places you'd like to lead individuals to know more about what you've been talking about, to do so. And I'll start with Kevin. If there's anything else you'd like to add before we close off today's session.
I guess, well, I would say that keep an eye on the district's website. We're developing it as we sort of speak, to have those resource sections for our businesses as well as for individuals to help reduce carbon footprint and so on. I would point out that there's a couple of grants that were just released. The Environmental Action Fund released $59 million, and that's around maybe things that Rethink Green and the Green Economy North do. And another one for retrofits is the Community Building Retrofit from FCM, just released. And then I think just maybe my last comment would be on forests, because that seems like a really sort of positive note to end on. But in Muskoka, because of acidification, we have a calcium deficient forests because it was basically stripped, and we have very shallow soils, of course. So one of the projects we're partnered with is called Ash Muskoka. And basically what we're doing is collecting, or what a nonprofit called the Friends of Muskoka Watershed is doing, is collecting ash and applying it in the forests. And one of the really early statistics that comes out of it is that you can increase the growth of our calcium deficient forest by, I think, about 50%, but that it actually between 30 and 50%, but it actually would lead to a capture of about 20% more carbon dioxide. Now that's a very preliminary number, but trees without calcium osteoporosis can suck more carbon dioxide out of the air. And so we're working on a bit of a study to verify that and look at how we can move it forward. But I would just suggest that maybe if there's calcium deficient forests elsewhere or lakes, that might be something to look at. My contact information, I think, was earlier, but I'm happy to ask any question or answer any questions offline as well. And thank you very much for inviting me. And certainly, I think one of the questions was, what would you like to see? What sector would you like to see in your area? Well, I guess I know I talk to Simon all the time, but I would like to see you guys down here more, which would be great. So I'll leave it there.
Fine, we'll go to the Muskokas, whatever. I guess we'll hang out there. Olathe, I'll pass it over to you. Is there any other final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's a hardship having to visit the Muskokas. I think I recently attended a youth climate summit, and one of the key messages that came out of that was First of all, be gentle with yourself. We probably all here on this call go to bed at night, often feeling like we're not doing enough. But know that you are, and that we are going to get through this. And also, just connecting to the land is an incredibly important part of moving forward with the green economy, and helping others to connect to the land, because once you have that connection, once you're in love with it, then there's sort of an endless amount of motivation and energy to learn about what you need to do next and how to move forward. And the problem's global, right? But the solutions are local and specific, and you can figure them out with your community.
Love it. Thank you so much. Norm, would you like any closing thoughts to share before we go?
I just wanted to pick up on something about the transportation, community transportation, your transit remark. We ran a network called the Ontario Community Transportation Network for a number of years when MTO was actually funding that. And it led to that grant program. So we have a whack of resources on our website about, community transportation options. So if they came out of those processes and through that network. So if you're interested in ideas that might not be, including some of that, on-demand systems, there's information and resources there, because they might qualify for that new federal fund. And we had a webinar with those people from Infrastructure Canada recently, just pitching that. But they're really in the program design stage. So if you want to influence how that program looks, I would encourage you to contact the Rural Economic Development Center. It's under Minister Monsef, so there's an opportunity right now, I think, to influence that program design so it works for your communities. So that's just a suggestion that we hadn't talked about already, but you can subscribe on our website, and then you get notice of all the webinars we do or that kind of information that's new and being posted. So I'd encourage you to subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thanks.
Very cool. A lot of information out there. I mean, not just the technology is already out there for us to succeed. The information's already out there for us to succeed.
Yeah.
Let's not reinvent the wheel, right? I love it. Priyanka, is there any closing remarks you'd like to share before we close off today?
Yeah, maybe one professional and one personal. On the professional end, I think my call out is, for any businesses, organizations that are joining today, that are potentially considering setting net zero targets or are interested in it, or if you've already done a lot and just kind of want to join a network to build a movement in Northern Ontario, shameless plug to connect with Rethink Green and the Green Economy North folks. And we'd love to have you a part of our broader Green Economy Canada network. On a personal note, my partner has relatives that live up in Wawa. And so he has been going to, taking trips from Toronto to Northern Ontario all his life. I was lucky enough to start that tradition last year. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I can just tell you that you really do have a little slice of heaven up there, Lake Superior, the stars. Like, I can't tell you enough how life-changing that has been for me personally to experience that, never having seen it growing up. And for my kids too, just to see what that has done for them and the ways, like, what we are looking forward to being able to make that as an annual tradition here. So my relatives would say, please don't tell anyone else about what we have up here. We want to keep it the way that it is. But I just wanted to kind of share that as something that I feel really privileged to have been a part of, and that, development of Northern Ontario and its success is really important to me. So thank you for the little window here to learn more about what it's like, having spoken to all of you. And I think it's really important work that everyone is involved with. So thank you.
There is no better way to end a seminar than on that note. So thank you so very much. I'd like to give a personal thank you to all our speakers here today for sharing the time. Sorry we went a little over a bit, but the talk was just so great. I'm really glad we got all of that out. I want to thank our founding sponsor, Valet, our sponsor for the whole weekend, our bronze sponsor for the weekend, Reliable Cleaning Supplies, all of our Green Economy North members, all the Green Economy leaders across the country, and of course, everyone in the call today who joined us for this discussion, it's refreshing to see others as invested as us. It just gives us that bit of energy to know that we're not alone, and that's so important. Absolutely. So with that, I encourage everyone, if it's not raining outside, where you are to get out, enjoy a bit of that nature that we're all trying to work to help protect. And otherwise, have a fantastic day. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, David. Bye.